Welcome to the France 24 debate. Never has a local election in the United Kingdom been so loaded with implications. The rise in popularity of two parties, Reform and the Greens, raising questions about the political system for so long based on two main parties. And on a wider scale, the fate of the UK Prime Minister could also be in play. Keir Starmer has been under pressure, it seems, ever since winning the election. There are already reports of plans to push Keir aside if Labour loses heavily come Thursday. So could this be Starmer's last stand? We're here to discuss this and all the other issues arising from what is very much a litmus test about how voters are thinking across the UK. We have here in the studio a PhD candidate working on Labour Party crises at the Université Paris-Nanterre, the man of the situation, as they would like to say in French. He is Nicolas Jarajoli. Thank you, sir, for being with us. We appreciate you coming in, and we're looking forward to hearing your take on what is going on in the UK right now. So Nicolas here in the studio. We're joined from afar by two guests who've also got their take on the situation. First, we'll introduce you from Cardiff. And it says on my script Cardiff, UK, but we all know it's not Cardiff, UK, and it's not Cardiff, Wales, it's Cardiff, Cymru. Richard Wynne-Jones, Professor of Welsh Politics, the School of Law and Politics at Cardiff University. How are you, sir?
Noswaith dda.
That's very good. I like it. Very nice, very nice. Diolch yn fawr. Speak to you in a moment, sir. Thank you very much indeed. So that's our man in Cardiff. Let's introduce you to our guest from Glasgow. And again, my script says Glasgow, UK, but it shouldn't. It should say Glasgow, Scotland. Well, perhaps more correctly in Gaelic, I believe Scotland is Alba. So say hello to Vary Sporridge, who is director of the Fraser of Alnada Institute and Economic Research Institute at the University of Strathclyde. Did I pronounce your first name correctly? That's my first question.
It's Mary because I don't have an H in it.
Ah!
So, yes.
Nicholas here was pointed out to me. There's no H, so it's Mary. Great, thank you.
Yeah,
okay, so that's my first error of the night. Let's hope I make no more. Let's start off with getting first impressions from all of you about the situation as we see it in the UK right now, because clearly local elections have a reputation of producing a sort of protest vote. It's something that I think is common to most countries. But the UK at the moment is very much divided in many ways, and the rise of two other potential big parties, depending on what happens, of course, Reform and the Greens, is perhaps complicating matters even more. So I'm going to start with our man here in the studio, Nicolas Jarajoli, to get his first take on what we are expecting to see when the polls open tomorrow. The votes are cast, and people turning up and sort of having their say, as they only can.
I think it's prefiguring what's probably going to happen at a national scale with the party system in general. Also, I think the kind of level of uncertainty about how things are going to break exactly is also probably going to continue. And so I think the best we can hope for in terms of analysis is to look at how this might prefigure shifts going on in Scotland and Wales, but in England as well, and how that might reshape the party system sort of going forward more in the long run towards a general election and maybe even the next one.
Indeed, because obviously for so long, people watching from around the world, of course, in their own countries have their own experience of what their local democracy is about. But the situation in the United Kingdom is that it's always been, I think forever, a two-party system where with something called first past the post is the winner. So it's one vote, whoever gets the most or gets over the majority line wins, forms a government.
Well, exactly. First past the post is known as this sort of robust system that kind of produces two big, stable, inverted commas, blocks. And clearly that's, very unlikely to happen in this local election. And looking like also we're going to have a sort of roughly four-way split going forward. It's interesting to think about how the popular vote spread translates into seats or councils or whatever when you have first past the post, because it can be very unpredictable. And that's why I think that the uncertainty that we have around this election is also itself what the future consists of is a sort of uncertain how things are going to break. Since universal suffrage, we've only really had this situation maybe once before in the 1920s, a very long time ago, a century ago. Who knows what's going to happen? It's both exciting, a bit scary,
Nicholas, thank you very much indeed. Exciting and scary. Who would have said this about elections? My experience of growing up in local elections when I was a youngster was that it was great because they used our school as a polling station, which meant that we got a day off school. We thought it was absolutely fantastic. So that was my experience growing up on a housing estate in an overspill town near Liverpool. But let's go to Glasgow and get Mary Sporridge's idea of what this all means. The fact that the people have their say. We'll get on to the Starmer elements in a moment. So if you're waiting to sort of talk about that, I'll ask you to pause a little bit and give us a sense about what this day means in Scotland, because as I understand it, it's the Parliament that's up for election.
Yeah, so it's not the local elections in Scotland, it's the national elections in Scotland for the devolved parliament. And the devolved parliament has a huge amount of control over health, education, and lots of areas of policies. So, and also we don't have just first to past the post in Scotland, we've got a proportionate system. So we've been used to multi-party politics in Scotland for many years, with around 5 parties involved, and Reform are now coming in as the 6th party. So what's probably going to happen in Scotland, which is pretty amazing, is that we're going to see the SNP becoming the largest party again after being in power for 19 years. So it's meant the campaign in Scotland's felt a little flat, with a lot of the outcome being, generally thought of as baked in. Although the rise of Reform is really complicating things and splitting the votes amongst those who believe in the Union and the UK staying together.
Often, Mari, in local elections, there is a low turnout, and you have pointed out quite rightly that what is happening in Scotland is a national election. So are they expecting a big turnout in this vote?
Well, the high watermark for the Scottish elections was the last one, but that was during COVID, of around the mid-60s. It is expected that it's going to fall considerably, and I think part of that is because voters feel a little bit, a Scottish word is scunnered, a little bit fed up with politics. So actually there is quite a lot of expectation that there will be quite a low turnout, which is unfortunate. OK,
well, let's hope that people do get motivated. Perhaps if they're watching this programme, they might hear your words and feel that they're going to get out and do that democratic duty. Because not everybody gets the right to vote, do they, across the world? That's something I think we often take for granted, living where we live. We have the right to say what we say and think what we think and vote how we want to vote. And some people don't get that chance. So anybody who's thinking of not bothering to vote, maybe perhaps should think again. Let's go to Cardiff. Our man waiting for us there in Cardiff is Richard Wynne-Jones, Professor of Welsh Politics at the School of Law and Politics at the University of Cardiff. My Welsh is very limited. I can say bore da, I can say iechyd da, I can say diolch yn fawr, and I'm ashamed because my grandparents were Welsh and they came from Caergybi, Holyhead on Ynys Môn, Anglesey. Okay, I know so I'm ashamed. But I've always kept an eye on what is happening with Welsh politics and the developments that are happening. Yeah. And in Wales, it's the Senate election, isn't it, that's happening?
Yeah, and it's, so as Mary was saying in the Scottish context, this is also a national election. We have a proportional voting system, which makes it different from the local elections in England. But this is, and I mean, you may think that I'm kind of overhyping, but this is the most interesting election of my lifetime, because what makes this election unique for anybody currently living in Wales is that we don't know, we're not expecting Labour to win. Labour have won every UK general election in Wales since 1922. They've won every devolved election since the devolved parliament was first established in 1999. They are trailing 3rd in the polls, and neck and neck for first place are Reform UK, which is the Nigel Farage vehicle, and the other party then is Plaid Cymru, the Welsh National Party or the Welsh Nationalist Party, the sister party of the SNP in Scotland, and they are currently neck and neck. They are on different ends of the political scale. So Plaid Cymru would be a left-wing, socially liberal, kind of green party. The Reform would be the opposite of all those things. And so not only is there real uncertainty for the first time in my lifetime as to who's going to win an election in Wales, but there's, the two parties that are vying for first place represent something completely different.
And what you're saying, Richard, about Labour's success and ongoing influence in in Wales since it seems like forever. We're talking about this as the place where the likes of Michael Foot, great Labour character, was the MP for Ebbw Vale for many years, aren't we? Neil Kinnock, of course, one-time leader of the Labour Party, a Welshman and a Welsh MP. His wife, your MP.
Bevan.
Yeah, and I was going to say, you beat me to it. The man who founded the NHS. You know, this is like, Wales has played a real key part, like a hub in a sense of Labour politics for so many generations. Is that breaking down?
Yeah, it is very, very rapidly breaking down, and it is an extraordinary thing to watch because, you know, throughout our lifetimes, the story in Wales will be not will Labour win, but how big will their victory be? And the fact that they are destined, it seems, for third place, it could even be a poor third place. Some of the polls have had them in fourth or even fifth place. You know, the fact that that Labour bastion is crumbling. I mean, I'm seeing a picture of Keir Starmer on my screen, and, you know, it's hard to see how a UK Prime Minister, a Labour UK Prime Minister, can survive losing Wales. But also then, if you think of the prospects of potentially a Plaid Cymru-led government in Cardiff, an SNP-led government in Scotland, Sinn Féin is the largest party in Northern Ireland, then that raises some fairly fundamental questions about the future of the state itself.
Richard, fantastic stuff. You're setting this up beautifully for us. It's brilliant. Before I let our guests in the studio loose again, because Nicholas is dying to say stuff, he's judging to get in. I need to go back to Glasgow to speak to Murray, just to get a sense of where Labour stand in Scotland, because previously, as I'd understood it, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, and I would be grateful if you do, I'd understood that Labour had gained an upper hand, the SNP had been kind of forced onto a retreat. All that is changing. Have I understood it correctly?
Yeah, I mean, and after the independence referendum, Labour took a real battering in Scotland and lost most of their seats, all but one actually. But they had a massive recovery at the general election where they won over 30 of the seats in Scotland, and the SNP were reduced to 9. So it looked like it was really good for Scottish Labour to potentially think about becoming, you know, into power in Scotland in the Scottish election. But since the performance of the UK Labour government has really disappointed people, that has meant that the Scottish Labour in the polls have fallen considerably. And really the fortune of Scottish Labour is about the performance of the UK Labour Party and Keir Starmer, who is very unpopular in Scotland now, given what they've done in their first couple of years in power.
So in terms of the issues in Scotland, Mary, could you just give us a little sort of, in a nutshell, whip round of what those issues are? What are the big issues that Scottish voters will be kind of voting on? I know it's a national Scottish election, but there are big issues, international issues, national issues, perhaps, that are weighing on this election.
Absolutely. People say the big issues are the cost of living, so how far they feel their money is going, and the NHS and the lack of access they feel they have to it, or they're feeling that it's not as good as it used to be. Now, one of those is fully devolved, but it seems that Scottish voters are still blaming the UK government for them, and therefore blaming Labour for them. So even though these are devolved elections, the performance of the UK government and the impact on everybody's pocket, which is both international and national, is dominating, which has kind of meant that the policy debate has been a bit flat because no real policy issues are being debated, to be honest, while it's dominated by the future of Keir Starmer and obviously what's going on in the Middle East. Indeed,
it's one of those things, isn't it? Mary, thank you very much indeed. Let's hear some thoughts then from some actual voters. And you'll recognise the accent, I think. They're from Scotland.
Government in at the moment is just not doing much of it. Yeah? And SNPs, they've been doing a lot. I would recommend farage, for him a change very wide. It'll make me make a change away.
But he never comes over as somebody as sensible. A bit like Donald Trump. He seems to make lots of amazing promises.
We put subtitles up because some people around the world perhaps won't catch the accent. I find no problem with it at all. So, Mary, just explaining why we did the subtitling there. It's no reflection on anybody's accent or trying to be disparaging in any way, shape or form. Some people get a little bit insulted by that, but I think it's about enforcing some sort of clarity. Let's now move on to why Keir Starmer and the Labour Party have gone from being, back in 2024, a party that won a landslide, remarkable results, with figures that basically even Donald Trump would struggle to find superlatives for. But now, such a short period later, Keir Starmer's ratings are basically flatlining. Let's bring in the man whose job description, PhD candidate working on Labour Party crises. You've got a few to pick from.
Well, I think it's not a big mystery what happened to Starmer. The majority was hollow in the sense that it was inflated by first past the post, and whether that was a result of very good strategy by the Labour leadership or luck or a combination, changes nothing about the fact that as soon as they got into power, all it took was a few either scandals or acts, unpopular acts, which led to that majority being reduced to so little. And although Labour is set to have probably the worst local election in maybe recorded history, it's not just about protest vote itself, because the Tories aren't in power and they're also set to have one of the worst elections. I don't think it's a mystery why Starmer has become so unpopular. I think that he's tried to please too many people and not do enough for anyone, and so everyone hates him.
He was elected because the British voters had enough of umpteen years of what Labour would describe as Tory misrule, with things going wrong, with sleaze, with all kinds of issues related to the mismanagement of the COVID pandemic as well.
And I don't think that we should discount that there was a certain amount of hope at the time when Labour was elected, but it was squandered. And I think that's all the more reason why he's so unpopular, which is that there was a little bit of hope, and then it was squandered by Starmer, and now people are looking for something that's more of a break, and that's where reform comes in, and in certain cases the Greens. And what's interesting is that in the nations, England's a nation as well, but in Wales and Scotland in particular, reform's ceiling is sort of the fact that there is already nationalist parties in those countries. Of course, it's a different kind of nationalism, sort of civic, more of a progressive nationalism. But I feel like, and maybe the other guests will be able to say a bit more about this, which is, how is reform viewed as an English party in Wales and in Scotland? And do they agree that there's a bit of a ceiling for reform as a protest vote in those countries rather than in England, where, of course, it has a much higher ceiling, in my view?
OK. Nick, you've set it up for me to move this on, because I was planning to go a bit more down the Starmer line, but this gentleman has seen where this debate is going. So let's listen now, before we bring in our other guests, to both Keir Starmer and Nigel Farage. Maybe you as viewers can compare and contrast, then we get the thoughts of our guests. So first, I think Starmer, then Farage. Let's take a listen.
Ask most people what matters to them most, and they will say the cost of living. And that is what we absolutely have to focus on. And that's why I'm so proud that that was the centrepiece of our budget last year and the focus of all of our actions, because we must always have in our mind's eye the people most affected by our decisions when we're taking our decisions.
We launched this campaign 3 weeks ago saying vote reform, get Starmer out. And all the evidence is we're doing incredibly well in many, many traditional Labour areas, the kinds of parts in the country that they dominated now for over a century.
There we go. Two politicians, 2 points of view. I noticed that Keir Starmer was wearing very dashing glasses, a little similar to mine. Different make, I assure you. There was a scandal when he was elected about taking free glasses, apparently, from some designer, and this made all the pages of the right-leaning newspapers in the UK. There's also currently a scandal regarding Nigel Farage and a £5 million gift from a crypto millionaire based in Thailand. He's described as British Thai, but there you go. It's a gift of a massive amount of money, and they're not asking the same kind of questions as they were over a pair of spectacles. What does that say about the media in Britain? Well, you can read into that whatever you wish, but can I bring in both Richard and Mari to comment on that compare and contrast between Starmer and Farage. Richard, I'll start with you. The two men, they represent different things, but in some way, the public will trust one, not the other, or vice versa.
Well, I mean, so Nigel Farage is very popular with a small segment of the population, significant, but nonetheless small. He's wildly unpopular with the rest. Keir Starmer seems to be wildly unpopular with everybody. So that's how I would characterise the difference between them. I think, just to go back to Nick's point, because I think that was very interesting and it's worth fleshing out. One of the reasons I think why Labour has fallen so quickly and why Plaid Cymru is on the rise in Wales and why the SNP is on the rise in Scotland and the Greens are on the rise in England is that Labour has been obsessed with a group of voters which most political scientists don't think exist, which is people who've gone from Labour to Reform. And Labour has been obsessed with returning these voters and is basically being, I think, tacking to the right and ignoring the fact that there are parties on the left which traditional Labour supporters feel comfortable in supporting, namely the Greens, Plaid Cymru and the SNP. And so what's happening is Labour is looking right, obsessed with reform, but is actually hemorrhaging votes to the left. And I think, and that it's leaving it in the worst of all worlds because nobody on the right seems particularly interested or impressed. Meanwhile, Labour is losing, a very, very large proportion of its votes.
And has this been, Richard, because of the policies at the start of the Starmer mandate? I'm thinking back to when benefits were slashed, for instance. And then the stance on immigration. I mean, these kind of things, almost taking a line that's more along a sort of Daily Mail readership kind of stance, rather than thinking of what would traditional Labour voters want.
Yeah, exactly right. And you can add to that, a very good example of that is the kind of reticence to turn back towards the European Union. 85% of those people who voted for Labour in 2024 in the last UK general election, which, in some ways was a kind of a hollow victory, as Nick was saying. But, Labour supporters are very keen on the European Union. The same is true of Green voters, of Plaid voters, of the SNP votes. And Labour, rather than trying to assuage them, it's actually seeking to assuage reform, but you can never do that. So I think it's falling between two stools, and it's looking at a very, very serious setback tomorrow as a result.
So in trying to please everybody, basically what I'm reading here is that Keir Starmer's pleased nobody. That's the bottom line, Richard, isn't it, I think?
Well, I'd say not quite that. He's looking right, and he's trying to assuage the right and assuming that people on the left will always vote for Labour come what may. And the polling is showing very clearly that's not the case. And I suspect that the actual votes in actual ballot boxes will confirm that tomorrow.
Richard, thank you for now. Please don't go away. Stay there, please. Let's go to Glasgow in Alba, Scotland. I'm showing off that I know it in Gaelic. Mary Sporridge is there, Director of the Fraser Valnard Institute and Economic Research Institute at the University of Strathclyde. How do you feel about the EU?
Well, obviously in Scotland we voted very strongly to remain in the EU, although there were still 38% of people who voted to leave, and those are obviously going to be some of the voters who have been interested in reform. I think for a long time we told ourselves in Scotland that voters here wouldn't be interested in a Nigel Farage-led project, which was seen as very English, but the polls have shown that that's not correct, and we could be on course for Reform to be the second largest party in front of Labour and be the official opposition, particularly as the Scottish Conservatives just completely, not quite disappear, but they're going to have very many fewer seats than they have in the past.
So in terms of how this happens, it's a phenomenal thing because I'm thinking, Murray, about I come from Liverpool, northwest England, Liverpool benefited immensely from European money in order to redo the infrastructure of the city, which at the end of the Thatcher era was very much on its uppers. The population was leaving at an alarming rate. There was no industry. There was very little business going on. There were still buildings that had been damaged from World War II that hadn't really been dealt with. There were lots of things going wrong. On a sporting term, of course, football, it was all going great. But for people who lived there were very few options. And then the EU came in and invested an enormous amount of money to create infrastructure and rebuild what is now a very vibrant place. If you go to Liverpool today, central Liverpool, it looks fantastic. It's like you've got sort of everything that's good about London in the middle of town, and it's all compact and accessible and great, yet the people in Liverpool voted only by a whisker to stay in the EU. Was that the Farage factor, Mari, that made people do that? Was Farage that good at selling his brand of let's get out of the EU, let's create Brexit, let's do this? And is he doing the same thing with reform?
I think there's lots of complicated reasons why people voted to leave the EU, and we can point, I think, to some of the different sort of lacklustre campaigning, particularly from the Labour Party, perhaps in the referendum, and the lack of organisation, and perhaps a little bit of assumption from the establishment that there was going to be a Remain vote. And to a certain extent, the Leave vote was a vote about living standards in the UK and the lack of improvement in them since the financial crisis. But Farage is very good at giving out populist messages. People are really feeling the strain since the high inflation that we've seen since COVID. And, you know, as populists do, he offers easy solutions to complex problems. And if people are feeling a bit a plague on all your houses for the established parties, then there's clearly a couple of places they can go with their, well, let's burn it all down and try something else, as we heard from voters earlier. And that's both Reform and the Greens. And the Greens have done quite well in Scotland in recent years, even been part of the government in the last session for a while, and they are set to do very well also in the election tomorrow.
The Greens are led by a gentleman called Zach Polanski. Let's take a listen to what he said recently.
I am both pro-Palestinian and I'm Jewish and I care about Jewish safety. There's no conflict in those positions. And actually, I think where some of the conflict comes is actually from Benjamin Netanyahu, who frequently conflates people's Jewish identities with supporting the Israeli government.
So this quotation from Zach Polanski, out of nowhere, but in a sense illustrating what we were talking about, the fact that this election is very different from other local elections. There are so many different aspects at play, and he was talking there about, you know, the fact that he's Jewish but he's pro-Palestinian, and clearly the ghost that's over that is what's been happening in the Gaza Strip and is happening in the West Bank and is happening in Lebanon and across the Middle East. So clearly these things perhaps at play when people go to the polls in the UK tomorrow. And is this something that we think we will see parties win, lose, draw, gain? I don't know. What's your sense,
I think in certain areas, certainly international issues will play. I think insofar as a local election, or in the case of Scotland and Wales, national elections, devolved elections, can work as a protest vote on issues that local elections don't necessarily relate to specifically. And yeah, I think that certainly it's been a way for the Greens to continue in their strategy of occupying the space to the left of Labour, which Labour have left wide open. And of course, this is perhaps the first time that such a threat on the left of Labour exists, a credible electoral threat on the left of Labour exists. Will the international issues continue to carry the Greens in the following years? Probably not by themselves, but the Greens also have policies on other things. As it happens right now, this is the hot topic, and so they need to use that in the way that they can, as all the other parties are in more or less cynical ways. I think that the Greens are doing a good job of their political strategy, which is to occupy that space, and it's a genuinely new phenomenon in British politics.
Indeed, finding an issue, finding a plan and building it. Mara, you were saying that Farage maybe has a plan, but there's not that much behind the plan. Do you think that Zach Polanski has perhaps a little bit more to offer in that sense? I'm not looking for your political leanings, I'm looking for the analysis of it, just in case people think I'm trying to push you into revealing how you vote. I wouldn't do that.
Well, interestingly, the Scottish Green Party is actually completely separate from the England and Wales Green Party, so they aren't led by Zach Polanski. They're led
But
by
does his
Ross
voice
Greer
affect
and
things, do you
Gillian.
think?
I think it does impact on things, and they are very aligned, I think, in some of their policies, with lots of policies around taxing the rich, paying more on social security payments, and also the stance on Palestine, for example, is very aligned to Zach Polanski. So they are going into that brand of more leftist populism, which is definitely stealing voters on the left of Labour, just like it is across the UK.
Richard, can I bring you in on the same topic? A man without a plan is not a man. I think that's attributed to Nietzsche. I don't think he actually said that, but clearly Polanski seems to be a man with a plan.
Well, I think that quote that you had from Zach Polanski really illustrated very nicely the way that UK politics is changing very rapidly. You started our debate talking about two large parties, and what you had through most of my lifetime, certainly in England, it was slightly different in Scotland than in Wales. You had two dominant parties, just a few competitive constituencies, everybody kind of hunting the median voter, they used to say. So they would be carefully calibrating their messages. They would be very cautious. Now we've got the populism of the right and the left. People are saying, this is what I believe, like it or loathe it, this is who I am. And it's not going to win you 50% of the votes. It's not even going to win you 40% of the votes. But in a very fractured political system, Nigel Farage could plausibly be UK Prime Minister with 28% of the votes, given the first past the post voting system. So, the Polanski quotes, whatever you make of it, it just illustrates, this is what I think. He's not calibrating that. He knows that will offend some people, but he doesn't care, because this is the politics that we now have.
It's also refreshing to hear somebody speaking so frankly, isn't it, in that sense? And again, I'm not giving away how I would vote, but I'm just saying we're used to hearing over the years politicians coming out with a load of flannel. As my old Irish grandmother used to say, God rest her soul, they're only out for themselves. That's what she used to say, And my Welsh grandmother said a similar thing as well. It's the sense that politicians just are doing it for them and for their own, and that's that. And maybe some might say that Farage fits into that category. Polanski different.
Well, there's some people who will absolutely love Nigel Farage, and Reform will do very well out of that. There are some people who love what you would call the kind of refreshing frankness of Polanski. What I think it tells us is that politics is changing, but because they're not carefully calibrating what they're saying. The kind of old politics has, I think, been swept away because of that sense of your Irish and Welsh grandmothers, kind of cynicism about the political class, a sense that things are not working, and people are kind of willing to give something else a shot. And in that context, people are buying what they regard as authenticity. Now, I look at Farage and I think, well, you are a creation, Mr. Farage. I also look at Zach Polanski and say, you are he studied drama in a Welsh university. He's an accomplished presenter of himself. So they're products in their own way, but people are buying that product at the moment.
Indeed, I hear exactly what you're saying. We were mentioning that, Richard, you were mentioning that Farage could perhaps be Prime Minister with just 28% of the votes. Maybe some kind of a deal has to be done. The obvious deal perhaps would be with the Conservatives. Now, there is a kind of a difference of wording coming out from Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservative Party, on this issue of doing a deal with Reform. She told GB News, no way. I think that was 3 days ago. Then she told Sky last night, by the way, if you're watching internationally, these are British broadcasters I'm talking about, OK? So Kemi Badenoch talking to them, saying that she wouldn't rule out a deal with the Reform Party. So there a real change of stance, it seems, from Kemi Badenoch. Let's take a listen to what she was saying just a while back.
What will be a disaster is seeing more Labour, more Lib Dems, more Green, more Reform, because none of these people are serious. The only party that is serious and that has a plan, not just for local councils, but for the country, is the Conservatives. Whether it's our plan to get Britain working, whether it's our cheap power plan, drilling oil and gas in the North Sea, lowering taxes, abolishing stamp duty, abolishing business rates for small businesses. We have a plan, no one else does.
Kemi Badenoch speaks well, but I'm wondering whether the three of you feel that the Conservatives are really in a bit of a cleft stick here, in a sense, between a rock and a hard place. Starting with you, Nick, if you could be quick on this one.
What, if Labour and the Tories are in between a rock and a hard place? Yes, they definitely are.
Specifically the Tories?
Specifically the Tories. Well, I don't think the Tories have found a voice at all since the 2024 election. And I struggle to see how they can find one when they can't go more right-wing, inverted commas, because that's just going towards reform, which sort of incites people to vote for reform anyway. And they can hardly pivot centre, because then Labour and the Tories will be fighting over the centre, which is what they usually do, well, often do, and is usually the way that you win, inverted commas, but actually now represents a relatively reduced electoral constituency because the edges, or what used to be the margins, have become so large. So, no, I don't think they'll do well, and I don't know what kind of voice they have found for themselves or can find for themselves in this situation.
Okay, they're struggling. It may come back. That's the way things happen in politics. I'm going to skip the Conservative question with my two guests in Cardiff and Glasgow, because I think I've got the sense of where they stand on this one and what they're observing there. And I want to now just sort of move towards what happens with Labour, what happens with the Prime Minister's position. I was at a football match up in Liverpool earlier this season. Everton Football Club playing Fulham. I had my daughter with me, and we bumped into a gentleman called Andy Burnham, who's a big Everton fan. He's Mayor of Greater Manchester, and some say he could be the next Labour leader. And we had a chat, and my daughter said, yeah, he's a really nice guy. I'm sure he'd be a great Labour leader if it ever came about. And then a lot of my friends were setting about him saying, you shouldn't be causing all these problems within the party. And he was happily defending himself among a big crowd of people talking about this at a soccer match. Very impressive stuff. I'm wondering whether in Cardiff, in Glasgow, whether you're feeling that maybe if Starmer goes, as could happen off the back of this election, if Labour did really badly, would someone like Andy Burnham be the choice perhaps to take on the mantle as leader of the Labour Party? Richard, first, please.
So, I mean, that's a very, very good question. I must say that my Labour pals are in complete despair about the state of their party. They are thinking about a post-Starmer world. A lot of them would favour Andy Burnham as a potential Labour leader. They think that he doesn't have the same kind of baggage that Westminster politicians currently have. However, there's a really fundamental problem. He's not a member of the House of Commons, and you cannot be Prime Minister without that. And Burnham did attempt to return recently. He was blocked by Starmer, very directly by Starmer. It may well be that Starmer loses control of the Labour machine, and Burnham can potentially challenge that successfully. But he needs to get elected to the House of Commons before he can then challenge Starmer. Starmer will do everything to stop that from happening. The other people, like Wes Streeting, Angela Rayner, potentially talked about as future Labour leaders. If they're serious about the job, they'll also want to stop Andy Burnham getting there. So it's not at all straightforward. And this is the real dilemma that Labour now have, is that, it's very difficult to envisage how you move forward beyond Starmer. However, if they retain Starmer, who is spectacularly unpopular, I don't think people outside the UK understand how unpopular he has become so very quickly. If they stick with him, then they have, it looks calamitous. The latest Westminster polling for Labour in Wales has them on 8%, in 5th place. So, it can get worse for Labour.
That is absolutely phenomenal, and it's something that you've never observed, I've never observed, certainly. Final comment will go to Mary Sporridge in Glasgow, up in Alba. I love saying that. Starmer might be wishing that everything could be judged through the Donald Trump prism, because the more that Donald Trump says badly about Starmer, the more it seems to give him a little boost. But perhaps that little boost isn't going to be enough.
No, and I think he is so unpopular across the country. As Richard said, the pretenders to the throne are all have difficulties, and it doesn't seem straightforward. And I do think it's underpriced that Starmer will stay on if, for example, they have a calamitous night, but people are broadly expecting that, and maybe that they'll just sort of limp on for a while longer until Starmer himself finally realises that somebody else needs to take them into the next election. So I think this is going to be quite a long and drawn out process, to be honest.
Mary Swarage up there in Glasgow and Alba, Scotland, thank you very much indeed for sharing your thoughts with us. Thanks also to Richard Wynne-Jones, who is in Cardiff, in Cumbria. Diolch yn fawr, I will say to you, sir. And thanks to our guest here in the studio. Thanks to our guests in the studio. Nicholas Jowjolly, PhD candidate working on Labour Party crises, and there are a few, aren't there, at the Université of Paris Nanterre. Thank you, sir, for being with us. Thanks to you all. Thanks for watching. We'll, of course, be following the story as it unfolds over the next 24 hours and beyond. Stay with us here on France 24.